Hello, my name is Niveda Kiridharan.
Hello, my name is Parvati Krishnan, and together we are so proud to welcome you to our very first podcast called
South Asian Women in Rare. In this podcast, you'll hear a lot about us.
And you'll hear even more about all the guests that we're going to be inviting, and we're so excited
to share these stories with you. Unfiltered stories, unseen strands.
Welcome to our podcast, Neena. Niveda and I are so excited to have you here. You are our second guest at the South Asian Women in Rare podcast, and we are so excited to feature you.
Wonderful to be here and really excited to meet both of you.
Thank you. So, without further ado, would you like to share us a bit about yourself and your background?
Absolutely. So, I'm actually come to the rare disease space because I live with a very ultra rare bone disease called Jansen's metaphyseal chondrodysplasia. It is a PTH receptor disorder. So, for Jansen's, we have an overactive PTH receptor that ends up generating a lot more turnover of bone. And so, our metaphyses are not developed as strongly as we would like it to be. And so it sort of bends the bones. So whereas in I think there's more of breaking happening. For us, it's more of bending. So because the bones are sort of soft at the ends, it doesn't support the weight of your body. And so it starts to bend. And mostly we see this at the ends of all the growing bones, and it can cause significant pain at the joints as well as at all the angles of the bends. And so it's ultra rare because there are only 30 patients worldwide. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 32 years old. And that was only because my son, my second son, who showed a little bit more classical signs of Jansen's. And, after searching really the globe for a diagnosis, it was actually a South Indian Asian doctor. And you should have her on your show, by the way, Dr. Sheila Nambudri from Amrita Research Institute in South India. She was the one person who was able to diagnose us correctly after 32 years. So you can imagine we had been to the US, we'd been to the UK. Actually, my first set of surgeries were in the UK, Nevada. My uncle was a doctor in London, and my first surgeries were there. And I was 3 years old when I had my first set of surgeries. And so I've had surgical intervention all through my childhood, all the way until I was 23. And then, of course, at that age, you think, oh, you're never going to get married because, South Asian women with disability don't get married, apparently. And so, especially if you come from a very conservative Muslim family that I did, and, the idea of disability in Asia is still frowned upon. It's still looked as something to be shunned and something that is probably a punishment, and all sorts of terms and cultural ignorance around it. And so I think there was the feeling in my family that I would never get married. And it just so happened at that time, I was in India. I had just finished my last set of surgeries, and I decided that I wanted to live on my own and do my own thing. And because by then I was 28 or so. Well, yeah, 28 or so. And all these talks about what is she going to do with her life, and because marriage is the ultimate, right, for South Asian women. And maybe for just Indian women in general, but definitely it's an expectation. And so there was a lot of it's not that I talked about it as such, but I could feel that pressure just around us. And so I did decide that I want to leave India. And so I moved back to Dubai, where I was born, and I was raised in Dubai in the Middle East. And really, I started teaching at a very early age. I was teaching in college in India at right after my first year of my degree. And by the time I had come to Dubai, I had already a PhD, and was teaching in school there. And then really just met my husband through an online sort of connection adoption. And it was really interesting because he was based in the US. And so he flew down, and, we got married a week later after having this, sort of 9-month conversation. And this year it'll be 20 years since our marriage. So, uh, yeah, quite a feat. 20 years, two different cultures, a rare, ultra rare disease, and two children with ultra rare bone condition, which, Niveda, how difficult one child with rare bone is. And so we have three wheelchairs in the house, and we have, wherever we go, we have got three power wheelchairs. So it's quite a lot. But I will tell you, um, with the rare disease and everything, it is the cultural differences that my husband struggles with the most, and not the rare disease. So, just, the Indian in me doesn't go away. So I think that for him that has been the biggest challenge, more than the ultra rare disease. I mean, those are things like you can't. I mean, you have to have support systems in place, and so he works for that. And but I think it's the cultural differences that he found much more pronounced and difficult to navigate. But of course, now after 20 years of fighting in our marriage, I think we've reached our happy place of like, oh God, he's not going to change me, and he's okay with that.
And
So
that's a sign of a good marriage.
yeah,
When you're comfortable in the fighting and you're like, it's just inevitable. You're gonna agree to whatever I say anyway. So let's just,
exactly.
cut the chase. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. So but yeah, it's been a journey. So I moved to the US in 2015 when we got our diagnosis, really with my second son. We got the diagnosis in 2010 with his birth. And right after that we had Googled, we'd Googled it, Jansen disease, and there was nothing, not even one dedicated publication around it. It was just, there was a byline in one paper for rare bone saying that, we could possibly turn off the overactive PTH receptor in Jansen's by creating an inverse agonist. And so I kind of cut out that line and that sentence in that paper and decided that we'd come to the US to find the writer of the paper. And we did. We came here in 2015. It took us 5 years to actually move here. And then the boys had surgery right after, a lot of surgery. And in 2015, we did end up, meeting Dr. Harold Jupiner, who from Boston Children's Hospital, and he's been our lead investigator. And the question I asked him was like, he had been researching Jansen's for 20 years and never met a patient. And he was so thrilled to see me. And, I said, I read this paper that you wrote, and I know it's not about Jansen's, but you mentioned Jansen's, and what would it take to take this hypothesis and make it real? And he said funding. And I was like, okay. And, I was so naive at the time, 2015, I just stepped into the US and into the rare disease drug development space. And I was kind of like, okay, we can do this. And then quickly realized how difficult that path is to get to treatment, and ended up helping them with their R01 grants, and that we were awarded through the NIH. And then very quickly after that, we were able to develop a mouse model and to really try this inverse agonist in the mice, and that worked. And so then we ended up writing a translational research grant, and that was awarded through the NCATS for that. And then COVID hit, and then we were sort of in pause and waiting. It was really frustrating time. And then we've had a couple of NIH shutdowns because of this current government, and that made things even slower for us. But we are now on the cusp of a clinical trial. In fact, it's happening this summer. And so I'll be the first patient, yeah, to try this experimental therapy for Jansen's. And really, it's been 9 years in the make. So if it wasn't for COVID, I think we would have done it in 7. But still, it's going to give our community a lot of hope, because there will be more interest for Jansen's. And I think that's been the whole idea, is to get it on the map of rare bone to, and now we have some of the big companies even talking about Jansen's, whereas remember when we started, there were no publications. There are now more than 15, 16 publications about Jansen's. We have a natural history study at the NIH. We have a registry, and we now have a therapeutic development pipeline. So we're really, really excited about the future. And so that's pretty much my story, Niveda. And Parvati, you've heard my story many times, but
I know every time you say it, I get goosebumps because I'm just like, you say it very easily, but I think the impact is so profound. First, 10% of the entire population lives in your house. So,
yeah,
there it's like, what? I had to do the math to make sure I was right. But that's just mind blowing for an ultra rare space. That's a huge thing. Because you're like, sure, I can bring three patients. I'm one of them. So
yeah, I know. I can bring the three.
I can guarantee you three people are going to be in the clinical trial.
Yes,
Which is not something most rare disease families have. Like, there's usually one person or two people. In our case,
right,
well, both our children were affected, and it's a family condition at that point.
right.
Your husband probably feels left out most of the times, and he's just like, I'm not part of this cool club.
I think he does. And I think he also doesn't really know what I do half of my time. He's like, what do you mean you're developing a drug? Like, what is
That's
it?
amazing, though, and you make it all sound good. But you did all of this with finding partners and finding
Yeah.
funding that is potentially available to everyone if you have the right
Mm,
partners and the right understanding of the systems. And I think that that is what is very unique with your story. Like, you didn't go on to raise $15 million to
no,
do
no,
the
no,
therapy. And I think that if
no.
you can share about that difference, and kudos to anyone who's doing that as well. Like, as long as
Yeah.
you get where you want to get, however you do it, that's the brilliant part. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is a really important point that, our story kind of stresses here is that when we had first started, we started the foundation right in 2017, and I attended the first event I attended was Global Genes, I think. And that there I heard that, all these wonderful people raising all these millions of dollars. And I was like, how am I going to raise that for a condition that affects, at that point, it was just three of us and maybe one more patient. And I was like, who's going to care? Like, literally, why would anyone give money? It's like literally saying I'm giving money to your family. And that's always so doesn't sit well with me. So fundraising was not an option. And the other thing is like we didn't have any staff. And we also, I don't have the physical capacity to fundraise. Like it takes a lot of strategy and know how. And I did not have that skill set to fundraise, right? And I didn't have any rich relatives that I could sort of phone a friend and say, hey, can I have $1 million? Um, and no amount of lemonade stands was going to do that for us. And so I really looked around and I figured out literally just Googling like what funding is available for rare disease. And then I spent hours poring over how do you write a response to that opportunity and figuring out like what would be the first step. And that's really finding all the funding opportunities out there is just a Google search. And I was very adamant that I'm not going to pay somebody to tell me what is already out there. Because there's always that middle person who says, no, I can help you if you pay me this much. And I didn't have even 5,000 to give anyone. Remember, we sold everything when we moved to the US. We were starting from zero. So I did not have money in a bank balance to say, okay, here's the seed funding to start this. So I knew what I could do, and that was to use my skill sets to figure out how to network, how to find partners. And we were really fortunate that we had the Boston Children's, the Harvard Medical School and the Boston Children's team to really spearhead this partnership because they were wonderful and genuine in their concern for Jansen's patients in the community. They were really willing to get in the ring with us, and really it I think it was important that we supported their work. And it's not like we had many investigators competing so that we had this problem of like where do we need to support. No, there was only one team that was working on this and we were willing to support them. And I think that was really, wholeheartedly, they're wonderful human beings, and they're excellent researchers. And they were the leading team in endocrinology for rare bone diseases. So we were fortunate to actually, find them and connect with them and have them willing to be participants in our journey. So I think that was crucial. They talk about partnerships, but they don't really tell you like how do you find partnerships, right? Like find your partners. Like how do you find partners? Like, do you just go and say, "Do you want to be my partner?" No, I think it's really an important piece of this patient advocacy journey that people don't teach you or tell you how important it is. So, it was. And how do you support? Like, if you're a small organization, it can be little things. It can be like we can, pay for their food when they go to the conference. We cover their tab for travel, or something small. It doesn't have to be really big, like we're going to support you with a grant. Like people find that even the small things, like is there a postdoc in their lab that we can help, because all hands on deck, right? Their lab is also not funded. They're like funded through different grant mechanisms, and we know that with the current government lots of grants and stuff. So how do we support them in that small way? So we had done several things like that. We had done one walk, just one, and it never raised a lot of money. I think it was 5,000 at the most, has been our operating budget for these last 9 years.
And I think like you give so many pearls then through this whole thing where you were like, find it, don't use middlemen, because it's tempting, and if
Yes,
you have the funding, great, but not everybody is able to. But it also took you a while to figure it out, and you are lucky, yeah, with
and
purpose, of course.
definitely.
And I wouldn't say lucky because it was just luck. Lucky with purpose. Like you found the right partner, you took the effort, you went to Boston Children's, you found the partner, but you made that educated guess of like, let's go here, let's take a chance, let's see what happens. Like that was then converted into amazing response. But then this it was a relationship you built over so many years, right?
Yes, exactly. I think that a lot of times we focus on things that can only be done by larger groups that have capacity. And that's really not always doable in an ultra rare space, right? Like, how do we, I mean, people say, like, build your data, this and that. But how do you do that with such a small group? And also a group that is heavily burdened. Like we have many kids in our population, and each one of them is going through a lot of physical uncertainties and burden. And it's really difficult when you think about rare disease that way and ultra rare disease, and say, we have to get a registry, we have to do this, and the registry has to be X, Y, and Z. No, I have always, like, I started with just a simple Excel sheet. It was not validated in any journal, or it didn't have any cool features. It was just, who are the people we know that live with this condition? What is their gene mutation? And basically a list of symptoms that I could relate to and I could understand. And if there are any outliers from those symptoms, I would just note that out. And so I would constantly, because at that point, not only are you giving valuable data back to your researchers, but you are the only one connected with a data set now. So I became sort of the mid person to connect all these patients to our research team. Remember, they had never seen a patient until they met me. Then they met my boys. And then we had a walk where 5 or 6 of us came together, and then our researchers met them. And then we had the ability to connect. And very quickly, I was able to get our gene onto, a screening for rare bone conditions. Not newborn screening, but basically, if there is a hint of a rare bone condition, could it also be Jansen? So there's some pre-screeners that are done in metabolic hospitals, like is it OI, is it XLH, is it Jansen? So we got onto that panel, and then the most large metabolic clinics. We were able to sort of give a few grand round talks. We were very intentional, like, and then we put x-rays up on our website. This was one very important thing we did. People don't put x-rays up of conditions because, it's HIPAA compliance, but these were all me. They were my x-rays and they were my son's x-rays. And so I put them up as babies, as toddlers, as newborn, as adolescents, and as adults. So
You
we
gave
have
your own consent. You did
I gave
consent
my
to
own
your
consent.
pictures there. There we go.
They're my consent, so I put them up. And so usually I have had people reach out, hospitals in Brazil and in Paraguay, saying we saw the x-rays and that's how we diagnosed this patient. And that was huge for us because when I saw my son's first x-rays, remember the bones of an adult, Jansen, look nothing like when children. And when I was a child, I don't have any of those x-rays. So, as a mother looking at x rays of my son, trying to figure out what this is, I had no comparison. Like, I would Google lots of bone conditions to figure out what is this, and it didn't match anything. And it looks so different in Jansen's. The bones are so frayed, they look like a paintbrush. My bones didn't look like that. So, how am I supposed to know what they have? Do they actually have what I have? Like, there were so many questions at that point and no answers. And now if now patients are getting diagnosed at birth, like I got diagnosed at 32. The other adult who's also living in Brazil, she got diagnosed very late too. But now every new patient that we have, they have been diagnosed at birth. And as our foundation, our material that's up on our, and it's simple material, it's not curated greatly. We didn't spend tons of money to get a person to design it or anything. I just uploaded it on Squarespace. And of course, now I think we moved it to WordSpace or something like that. I don't even know what our hosting is because a student of mine is hosting it. He did all the work for it. He's excellent young man. And that's it. And the other thing we did, which was really very important, is like we availed of the Google suite where, and it's free for nonprofits. And so what it does is like it bumps your foundation to the top, so anytime you do chondrodysplasia or even chondroplasia, our foundation pops up first anywhere in the world. So they will immediately connect with us. So that was the one way we did that so that we're able to find patients. And so today we have about 15 patients who are living with this condition connected through the foundation globally. And so I think that that's important. Like I think ultra rare is very different in that we don't fit the typical funding model. We don't fit the typical model of bringing drugs to market. So we've got to figure out other ways of doing it.
100%. But what I was really interested is that the consent bit is like you're putting out your own x-ray. You're the only person who's got the consent. You're literally giving yourself consent. And I remember that for myself. So I was at university doing my dissertation in human nutrition, and I decided to do it on OI and osteoporosis, comparing them both in dietary space. So I remember I ended up using my own X-rays, and then they were like, "But you didn't reference this. You just wrote your surname." And I was like, "Yeah, that's because they're my own X-rays. I'm referencing myself in this."
Yeah, exactly.
And I
And
think
So
sorry, I think that's
yeah.
something that we've heard quite often in the various spaces that we've been, because we're always told like, oh, patients may not be comfortable. And I always say, are you kidding me? I have all sorts of medical records that come to me via Facebook Messenger by these random people. Then I have to tell them, please don't send it because I'm not a doctor. But they'll send it to me and they'll be like, we're okay. We're sharing it to you because we want you to just look at it and tell us, like, what do we do? And I'm like, one, I'm not a doctor. But the thing is, there's a dire need for patients with ultra rare diseases or even rare diseases like Nevada to get answers. And
Mm,
sometimes if social media, I call it social media, like we had the discussion this morning, we call it social media, but if there's a way to connect with someone who has experienced it
mm.
or gone through it, or in your case, Nevada, like you were like, I am putting my own x-rays to teach you something and
Yeah.
share with
yeah,
you.
exactly.
as long as we're aware and knowledgeable that we're doing it in a public space and that it can be tracked back to us, then I think that sometimes there's a lap overlap of too much ethics, too much like consent
Yeah,
issues, and I think that people maybe that's a change that needs to happen. That in this world of social media, in this world of people putting out their information in more ways than one, that we may have to rethink how we move forward with incorporating some of this. And, again, not that we want people to send us things through Facebook or chat, but once they are connected to us, then there's a
Yeah.
process in place. Like you said, Nina, like the physician reaches out to me because of the pictures he saw on Facebook, but then our website, but then after that, the system exists where you're then
Yeah.
sending the researchers, right? So I do feel
Yeah.
like to our point, like we advocate and we need to advocate because there's a global like lack of that. And
Yeah. I think
yeah.
you're absolutely right. I mean, there is a system. Then I connect to, the patient to the clinician, and then they take it over. And then, of course, then there's consent on that side, and they move forward, right? So I'm not sending the X-ray to anyone else because at this point I know whether it's Jansen's or not just by looking at the X-ray. And if it is Jansen, then I will say, can I connect you to our lead researcher? I'm pretty sure he'd be very interested to connect with you. If they say yes, then I connect them, and that's done. But they now have, because of my website, they have a place to go. I think very important is that, we are not just advocates in the ultra rare space, we are disease builders. So I always say that because we are not just focused on awareness and patient support and policy advocacy. That's all great, but those are for bigger groups that have well established capacity to do that. Ultra rare, we have to really and in order to define the disease, we need characteristics. So we need to be able to say, I have a list of characteristics on my website. Like, this is a Janssen. This is what you will see. And if you hit any of these, that's probably what you're going to end up with. And then we have to be able to establish what is the diagnostic criteria because it took so long for me. If you have elevated if you have PTH elevated without elevated calcium, that you don't have Jansen's. But that was wrong, and that's really what threw my doctors all of those years. And that's very important. Like, you can have Jansen, even though you may not have elevated calcium levels in your blood. That was a very important diagnostic criteria, and then we put that up on the website. So being able to define the disease itself is really crucial. Establishing that diagnostic criteria is also the second step, and then making sure that the global patient population can connect with you. And so we are building the field here from scratch. We are disease builders. You can only advocate for something that already exists. We don't exist in ultra rare yet. So step one, build your disease. Like, build that understanding around the disease, right? They say all the time, like, create what do they say at these conferences? Build disease awareness. Like, what does that mean actually? It means to, for ultra rare, it means defining the disease. Like, what does the disease actually look like? Establishing that. Like, if it's pictures, it's pictures. I have 100 pictures on my website. If you go down, we really try very hard to make sure that we are, putting across what is so important to us is to establish. So we are, because there's no viable path to therapy for us, this is important for us. We cannot get funding for research, basically. We have to create the conditions for investment. I think that's a big difference between rare and ultra rare, right? People in rare can find funding for research. We actually have to create conditions for people to invest in that research, right? So it's really a different ball game when it's ultra rare.
So we just have to tell you, we felt like we are getting a master class from Nina, and we're so thrilled. And we both are like, oh my God, there's
a
just so much
hundred
to learn
percent.
from Nina. So we should have started the podcast with "Welcome to the master class with Nina," but we maybe will end with it and say more to come. Um, how has your culture, your heritage, like how you grew up, how has that influenced the work that you have since done? because you only got diagnosed at 32. So up until 32, a lot of your experiences, like you said, were so driven by how you grew up and the culture around you and the community and the people. And how has that shaped where you are today? Whether it's you as a person, Jansen's, you wear so many hats.
I think that's a really great question, Parvati. I think my background and my upbringing has a lot to do with how I sort of maneuvered the space, as well as my own disability and then my rare disease. So right from the beginning, my father, he is a very traditional South Indian man. He's an engineer, and he has always raised us in such a way that, he's a problem solver. He's not one to sort of sit in a corner and like worry about like, what, oh my gosh, my daughter has this. Like, I grew up not even knowing what I had, right? And not even having a label to what I had. And I still went to school. He said, you will get an education. He would carry me up the stairs to my classroom when, after my surgery. I still remember that very, very vividly. And when the doctor said her bones are bending, so when he told doctors that her bones were bending, they would not believe him, but he was like really unfazed by that. And he went about, he would make my shoes. He would I still remember being tied to the ironing board when I was really young to keep me straight so my bones won't bend, because he was trying everything logical in his head, his engineering brain, to solve the problems. And so he would take me to PT, and he would and I was raised with two brothers who were absolutely, without any physical limitations. And so I played cricket. I played all sorts of sports. We were very busy I would go for surgery. I would have plaster and cast and everything, but I would still be engaged in my neighborhood and in our apartment. It was a very traditional upbringing. Never once did we talk about what is this rare disease, how do we find it. Maybe they had thoughts, but they never discussed it with me. So I was so oblivious to a lot of that. So I grew up not having that. I always was an advocate for disability even before I became an advocate for rare disease. So because I grew up in spaces that were not inclusive. So my school never had an elevator. Now my sons have elevators, and they still have problems. And so there's so many issues that even with access, there's still more that we want, right? We had the bare minimum. So I grew up with the bare minimum and still being able to maneuver in those spaces. And my father, once, I never saw him give up. I think he did his best using the tools he had. And I've written about this in a blog story about my father, because I think I get a lot of my conviction and my strength from him. He was just a person that you couldn't, he would always find a way. He never really, I've never seen him feel defeated. So, and we South Asians especially are very competitive. Like, if somebody says, so my first sentence to me when I came to America and I was at the NIH, I had my own board at the NIH Rare Disease Day. I put it up myself. Like, I had no idea how a board should look. I just cut pictures of my kids and their x-rays and stuff, and I stuck it up on that board. And the one person who came up to my table, I was the first table in that room, and he said, nobody's going to care about three kids. And that time, I mean, three patients with this disease, because at that time, they were thinking about it from a commercial standpoint, like, who was going to invest in that. But it hurt me, and I was like, and the Asian in me was like, just you wait, I'm going to show you. Like, I'm going to change that narrative for Jansen's, where people will be interested in it. So I think that that's been my motto, kind of like, okay, we can't do it this way, is there another way to do it? If I write one grant and I don't get it, can I write it again? Can I learn from the first time and write it again? I don't feel defeated. Oftentimes I just keep telling myself it's a time thing. The time isn't right. It's going to happen, but these things have to happen before it. So I'm always thinking about it night and day, like what has to be the next step. So strategizing. And then I'm also a firm believer in that, if you find paths that work and you share that, then it's going to lift everyone. And in the process, there is that, we believe in that, universal good will bring come back to you in universal good, in some way it comes back to you. So I'm a firm believer in that. Like, that comes from my roots. My grandmother was very, very religious. She would pray. She would always say that we have some bad, omens and things. That's why we all got this disease. And, in some way, she said you just have to keep doing good. And so, to cleanse the bad, even though in her very warped understanding of, the world, that was her understanding of it. But there might be some negative truth is that, you can do good and hopefully it comes back to you, is probably what she was trying to hint at in her own very warped way. But I think it has definitely molded who I am. I do not get upset by seeing that there's no accessibility in certain places. I know how to talk about it in productive ways and change things because of it, and that's really all from my father.
It's amazing.
So, accessibility, you just mentioned that you don't actually get upset when places aren't accessible. So, for It's so for me, I don't tend to get upset, but then it'll be like my friends that will get upset. And how do you actually deal with that? Because I normally be like, don't worry about it. But no matter how many times I'm going to say, don't worry about it, they're still going to be like, oh, I was really looking forward to this. I was really looking forward to taking you here. I'm so sorry. So, how do you deal with that? Where other people who really want to go, but then they don't go because of you, if that kind of makes sense.
It's a good thing. So the way I approach accessibility, because I've been doing this for a really long time, and remember, I come from a place and time that was not accessible at all. So even if I have like a little accessibility, I'm really grateful. I think, people here there's more accessibility here than there are in lots of places around the world. So I come from seeing that. So it doesn't upset me as much. I look at accessibility, or the lack of accessibility in two ways. I think about, okay, how do I get through this immediate situation, and then I'm always thinking about how do I push for longer term change, right? So there are really two specific things going on in my mind. So if I come across a situation where something isn't accessible to me, I always think ahead. So if I'm planning a trip somewhere, I'm always looking, I look it up. I sometimes even call the place and say, "Hey, I have three wheelchairs." Um, and if it isn't, then I say, "Well, can we move to the ground floor, or is there another room, or is there another option for us?" I've been to rare disease conferences where it hasn't been accessible, and so I always ask, "Is there a virtual option?" Because I know, having gone to that space, that it wasn't ideal. So people aren't thinking about it from that end. So I'm always proactively planning, so I don't, sometimes even with all the proactive planning, you can come there and realize it's not accessible. Uh, and then I try to make sure that, humor is a great way. I always use humor in that sense, like, so that it kind of eases the tension if I'm traveling with other friends. Um, and it's just like a recurring barrier. This happen often at this place. Have I come here before and pointed it out, and they still haven't changed it? Like, for example, airlines always break our wheelchairs, and I have made, several attempts. Like, I have actually gone to the airport here in Omaha, and I have done a whole course with them, talked to them about accessibility, and they've changed a lot of things because of it. So, how do you work around, getting people to really own their spaces and make it more accessible? So, and sometimes I will also carry portable ramps with me. I have always backup plans. Like, if, for example, if this doesn't work, then where else can we go? So I try not to make such a big deal. If I'm with friends, I would say, okay, this isn't ideal, but let's reduce the friction here, and perhaps let's go somewhere which is more accessible, maybe down the road to another place. So that's kind of how I deal with it, Nevada. I know that it can get really frustrating, but I have found that the more angry I get, it sets an example for my children, and they get really annoyed with that. And so, they're always telling me to calm down. So I realized that with time, that it's not setting them an example of how they need to deal with inaccessible spaces, because they're going to grow up and they're going to be on their own, and I want them to be able to deal with it in a more constructive way. So I just try not to get upset about it.
I just want to say, not that I have anything to say directly about this topic, but I also feel culturally we tend to start feeling guilty for others, which we shouldn't. And so I do want to tell you that it is not
Oh,
on you, or it's not your responsibility. It's wonderful to have people in your life who care enough about
yeah,
you to feel bad that you're not able to go somewhere because of which they're also not able to go somewhere. That's a good friend. And I also think
totally.
we also need people that don't have this personal experience themselves but are seeing others, because those are people who are going to help you make the change. And so for anyone listening, like I, at
Yeah.
this point, Nina, when I grew up, and I still don't know, I still don't think it is the case, but when I there was absolutely no way there was anyone with a wheelchair in the school that I went to. I grew up in India as well. We went up and down staircases. Like, there was one elevator, but it was in one end of the school for teachers only. So I just never saw a kid in a wheelchair. They obviously existed even then. So it's very fascinating how, like, I wonder, I always think, if I go back now, am I going to see more kids in my school that I went to with wheelchairs? Has it changed? Has perception changed? Has the community changed? Has it become more accepting? But if it hasn't, then the gap becomes larger and larger. Yeah.
Think perceptions have changed. I mean, I get invited by colleges in South India to do talks, and I'm always amazed with how incredibly open-minded the students are. And when they ask questions, they're so informed. So definitely social media has helped with that, because they're seeing, much more accessible world around them. So it is changing them. But what hasn't changed is our infrastructure, right?
Mhm.
There still isn't ramps in buildings. I went back to Kerala for the first time in 10 years since coming to the US. And it was the first time that my kids had been there, and they could not go anywhere. Like, we could not take the wheelchair because we could not get out of the airport with a wheelchair.
It was regarding the school thing. Basically, like in Germany, I was the only one with a wheelchair in my school. Um, Again, no lifts. It was stairs. I remember TA, or teaching assistant, lifting the back, and then a student would then see the teacher struggle putting me up, and will come and grab the front of my wheelchair, and this was before I had an electric wheelchair, and help me up. Even
Oh
though it
my
was
God.
about 4 or 5 steps, I'd have to do that in the morning when dad or mum drops me off. I would have to do that break time, lunchtime, every time we go out and then come back into the school building. Pretty much that was 4 years of my primary school life in Germany. And then I moved to the UK, and then my first primary school in the UK was all ground floor, which was an absolute change. I had one other person in the entire school that was also in a wheelchair. He was in year 2 whilst I was in year 6. And then the first time I probably saw a lift in a school was probably in my secondary school.
Wow.
But yeah.
I mean, Nina, that brings me to another point. Like, how has you growing up and now watching your children grow up, has there been differences? Because they've not grown up in the same places that you have. They've grown up obviously more in the US. They travel to other places, but have you seen changes, real changes? How has your upbringing of them been different than how you were raised? Besides the time and the place that's been going through.
I think that's a really good question. Um, because I grew up in a different time, different culture completely, and now they are growing up in a different space, So from the outset, like, parenting a child with an ultra rare disease is just harder parenting. It's just different, right? And but then when you are a parent who has an ultra rare condition, and then you have to also parent to kids who you've passed down the gene to. It's really twice as hard, and there's really no roadmap for that kind of parenting, and I think it's very challenging at the outset. And then you layer that on with a different culture, a different environment. And, you know, even though I might be an expert, so to speak, on the disease because I've lived it longer than them, and we all share the same mutation. Phenotypically, we're very, very different. So I think that there are no guidelines for that kind of parenting. It's really just you're on free fall. And it's sometimes can be the emotional load can be really layered. And what has really been very interesting for me is that I have to constantly check myself because it's not their experience is not mine, and I have said this to myself mentally many times. So I'm not just navigating an entirely new system and framework, but I'm also parenting them having the same disease, but their entire experience is different than what I had. Like nobody's carrying them up two flights of stairs to school, and yet their concerns are still valid. Like, if they had somebody say a nasty comment, or somebody said something that was unpleasant or unkind, or there was a party, or there was some outing that they weren't invited to, or something like that, all of those concerns are still valid for them, and I try to meet them in that moment and not carry with me like, why are you crying over this is so silly because when I grew up this was not there. So I try not to do that, but I do also try to instill in them some form of resilience that was part of my upbringing. Like they have a much more layered emotional um response to their rare disease than I ever did. And now I don't know whether it's because they're brought up in a different culture and different situation and environment than I was, and or they just have each other, and therefore they also have me, and they have a lot more emotional load. Remember, I grew up without having any siblings that were like me, and nobody knew what I had. So there was a lot of ignorance in my upbringing, right? And we have a lot more knowledge there, and they have each other, they also have me. There's no light at the end of the tunnel, like for them to say, oh, it goes away, or this disease will get better, because they see me, I'm also in a wheelchair, I'm also struggling physically. And so for them, maybe that is an unconscious load for them, I don't know. And so it's really a different scenario, and I try not to go into the weeds with them. And I try not I really try to take the best parts of my upbringing and meet them where they are, because their emotions are still valid here. We never had those emotional discussions in our culture, right? Like the existential questions of like, why am I like this? Or, if I went to my father with like, why am I like this, dad? And he would just look at me like really confused, like something's wrong with me. He'll tell me go study something or go read something. He would not be um you know w- accepting of that question. Not accepting, but he wouldn't know how to respond to it. Like there's almost a sterility of emotion there that doesn't exist in this culture. And so in many ways it's good, and in many ways it can be really difficult as well. So I don't really have an answer. I try my best and I'm learning from my children as well how not to be so they sometimes say you're so heartless because you just don't understand what we're telling you. Because for me, the emotional entanglement of my rare disease as I was growing up wasn't as large as it is with them. It's really difficult to put into words, but I do see it differently.
I completely hear what you're saying, and I think this is a master class for any moms who are dealing with children with rare or ultra rare diseases, because some of the things like my child constantly reminds me is I am the patient. This is what I am telling you my experiences, and oftentimes it's like, really? That's what you feel? And it's very eye-opening because sometimes it's not even like, like to make it more technical, it's not a clinical endpoint. but it's something that matters to him. I'm being taught that
Yeah.
by very house every single day. Like, I don't want this and I don't care about it. And I mean, I didn't grow up with it. We didn't come to know we carried the gene much until much later. So it's very fascinating how, like, I have to, like you said, we have to remind ourselves, like, I'm not going through what they're going through. So their journey is very different and they may or may not share it with me, but it still doesn't reduce the burden for them. And Niveda, as the youngest person in this group, you may be able to relate to it
A
more than
hundred. I 100% agree. Because even this morning, if I'm honest with you, me and my mum, we had the conversation of if I should go swimming tomorrow or not. And I was like, maybe, like, I was debating it in my head anyway. But then I was like, maybe it's a bad idea. And my mum was like, why? I was like, Mum, my arm kind of hurts from the bisphosphonate infusion I had on Monday. So I'm probably gonna use it as an excuse to recover. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I do think that's very different, right? The time your mom and dad grew up is different than when you're growing up. If it's
Mhm.
in the future, that's going to be very different. And I think that's something I can relate so much to what Nina's saying because our kids are the same age. And sometimes I'm just like, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing right? Sometimes the lines are so blurred because there's also this different level of my parents can still question anything I do. And I will still feel like I'm answerable to them, even though I'm way older and not dependent on them. But I think that
Yeah.
that stuff is such a cultural shift because now I have to learn to let go of my child because he's going to live on his own. And, there's just so much mom guilt that goes with it because I'm like, am I not caring enough? Am I not, you won't need me anymore? Then how am I
Hmm.
going to know what's happening in your life? So, I mean, there's just so many different layers of parenting this ultra rare kid that we process, and we're thankful that he's alive and he's thriving and he's wanting to go away, with the same
Mhm.
dichotomy of, oh my god, how am I going to save him or help him or take care of him if he's not connected in some way, in proximity, or what have you, that we're used to. So thank you, Nina, for sharing all of that. I
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, it's such a great question, right? Like, I've often thought about it and I've never really been able to articulate it properly. So, you asking that question has really made me think more about it. Like, we try to do our best, but it is undoubtedly Asian families grew up in a model where we don't. I mean, strength is sort of endurance and sort of not expressing always, right? Illness is always quietly handled, sometimes even invisible, right? But in US, it's all about identifying your feeling and being able to really express it, like name your feelings. Like when my kids were in primary school, they came back about and they had these little cutouts and stuff. Talk about what's hard, your experience matters. We say all the time, like, rare disease lives matter. We build this framework that sometimes is very unfamiliar to me because we did not come from that, right? So when our child expresses like fear or frustration or sadness about their disease, I feel very overwhelmed with it. Like, I don't know how to deal with it because at the same time, I was never allowed in those spaces to, not that I wasn't allowed, but it was not set up in that way, right? And not because it was wrong, but it wasn't the model we were used to. Here, it's about identity, like illness identity. Like, you have to identify in some way with your condition. Like, this is kids will say, right, this is part of me, or they'll say things like, trying to figure out deeper questions of their reasoning. But we did not grow up that way. There was so much less questioning of decisions, and like you said, so there's a lot of tension in that in between space that, if you think more about it, maybe drive us crazy. But
Yeah.
I think that we don't have to change completely who we are, but I think we need to acknowledge it without overextending. And, I can see that this is really frustrating for you. And, try to figure out language that is modeled in the space that they are used to, And sometimes when I say those things, I feel dumb because I'm like, my God, I've never used this kind of verbiage, let
Never
alone,
heard it either. Yeah.
try to frame it. And they just look at me and they're like, Mom, yeah, they look at me and they say, Mom, you are now trying to give us phrases from some talk show. So
I agree.
So
I
it's a
think
big
it's
shift, I think, from the emotional silence that we're used to.
I think for us, if we didn't think about it, it didn't exist.
Yeah,
So don't think about those things. If those things bother you, don't think about
right.
them and then just move on. There's a lot of burying that
Don't think
happened in our
that's how, right?
feelings. Okay.
Yeah, we probably have a lot of, buried feelings. Yeah. So,
Oh, Niveda, welcome to our TED Talk on emotional growing. Oh, but we have some questions we're asking
yeah.
everyone, Nina. Do you watch movies? Are you still connected? Like, what's your connection? Music, movies? You still participate in all of that?
Well, yes. I still like anything that comes up on Netflix. Like I actually made my kids watch RRR and they loved it. So that was our last big you know,
Oh, you guys have a lot of catching up to do.
non-English movie. I know, I know. I
Oh
know,
my
but
God.
that was we don't really get a lot of time. They're really busy, but that was one they really enjoyed and they liked very much. But I do miss that world. But Rare has really taken over everything.
I have a very fun question for you. How do you deal with three wheelchairs in the house? I struggle with my one.
Yeah, so we do have a ramp that connects to our house that we can pull out if we need to. Um, and most often, if we go anywhere, that's the bigger problem. In the home, my kids can move around on their own without their share. Sometimes when they have surgeries, my husband will carry them around, or they have assistive devices like walkers and things. We do have travel chairs that are collapsible that we can bring into the house that they can use if they need to. They do a lot of moving around in the house on their own because our house is not really that big for them to maneuver around. um, for us, the biggest problem is going anywhere, right? Like making a trip or a vacation or something, it's so hard. Like even going to the hospital, we go to Delaware, and from Philadelphia, we have to get to Delaware, and we would have to take two vehicles, like two vans. To accommodate three wheelchairs. So we're paying double. And oftentimes, they will say, yeah, it can take a wheelchair and they'll send it. And it can only take one. So then we have to now get three wheelchair vans to go to our destination. And I'm always nervous about that because my younger son is still he's 15 and he's little, and I don't always feel comfortable about him going alone in a vehicle. So we have to be really planning ahead. So I do a lot of planning. So within the house it's manageable, but in order for us to go anywhere, we try to pick destinations where we can take our mobility van. So we have two mobility vans, one that my son drives and one that I use. So and that's hard. I know it's hard to get mobility vans. We have just sort of been able to understand the system in order to get it a little better. So it's hard. Is the bottom line, Niveda.
But also you built or you've moved your house and you've made it more friendly to accommodate all of this, right? Because
Yes,
you could
yes,
predict when they were
yes,
younger that this was the trajectory and this is this and that requires tremendous planning. Like I think that's
absolutely.
one of the biggest burdens that rare disease families go through, right? It's like there's two extremes to our living life, right? Like Nevada, you would agree to like one is actually the treatments and the cures and the all these other big ideas and research and drug development, but then there's
Mm,
this huge, larger part of the conversation is living through it to make it there.
exactly.
And that
Yep.
is
The daily life.
the daily life, and I think that's where all our commonalities are. Like we don't have wheelchair issues, but we have access issues to treatments or to
Yeah.
travel or
Yep.
Yeah.
to finding patients everywhere else. And I think like
Yeah.
that, like maybe that whether you're in the UK like yourself or Nina in the US, wheelchair breaking down seems to be a chronic problem. So that
Yeah,
like
agreed.
lack of understanding somehow, even with all the social media push, even with all the complaints that we all make about how it should be better,
Yeah.
like that's the part that always really grates me is like, this is an issue. Yes,
Yeah.
it's a very small population of the entire global travel that happens, but it should be better. Like I remember when we had traveled to India after one of my son's surgeries, and he was not able to walk long distances, but he
Mhm.
physically, according to them, looked fine, every place we went, they would be like, "You need a wheelchair, but you look okay. You can't walk? Like, what is wrong with you?" And
Yeah.
he was much younger and he was very uncomfortable because he was just like, why are they asking me this? Like, how am I supposed to look for them to think that I have a problem? Like, do I need to show my surgical wounds to them to show them that this is why I'm not able to walk today? So it's just very, these are like common things we all experience in different ways. And I think no matter where we
Mhm.
are in the world, some of that culture, that heritage, that growing up, that those barriers, there are people here in the US when we travel who question or wonder without actually telling us vocally. That's the biggest difference, is they're still questioning, like, why does he need a wheelchair? And you can see that processing happening without them actually verbalizing it. And I think that we're a long way to
Yeah.
go, but thanks to people like both of you, we're getting there. We're at least having people come out and say, this is a problem and this is not okay,
Yeah.
you know?
What's even worse
Yeah. We have a long way
is
to go.
yeah. What's the worst was last year actually. So old chair. I've recently got my new chair. It's about 2 months old last Thursday. Um Basically my old electric wheelchair, ever since two nearly it'll be 2 years ago in June. So yeah, 2 years ago I went over school. I was going to work, and the workplace that I was going to happened to be my old school. So I knew the school very well. I know the building. I know everything. But I didn't realize that the door was like broken. Like there was no sign. So I went over, and there was this little metal hump bit that you have to go over it, and that was broken. I wasn't told. There was no clear sign, and it got caught, and it broke the bottom of my wheelchair,
Oh.
and it snagged the bolt. And what happened in return of that was I was ringing Butcher Services. I was trying to get an appointment, and they were like, someone came out on an emergency, and then they came and said, right, your bolt was broken, but your chair's 12 years old. Well, 11 years old. And we're like, we don't know if we can fix it. And I was like, right, okay, what does that mean? Because my instant thought was, oh, okay, that probably means I've lost my job because
Mm.
I rely on my electric wheelchair for my independence. And then I was like, what does that mean? And they were like, well, we don't know, but you can't use the chair at the moment. Took them 7 weeks to fix that chair.
Yeah. It takes that long. The parts are always special and difficult to order. So, yeah.
Yeah,
This has
and
been a
then
wonderful conversation.
what was even harder was because the chair was discontinued, and no one
Hopefully, you've
actually
got a
told
good one
me.
now.
Thank God you got a better one or a newer one at least now.
Yeah. And no
Nina,
one actually told me.
yeah, I mean, unless it happens to them, nobody, I mean, this is true for any human, any part of the world, unless it happens to you, you
Yeah.
Sure.
and the gravity of what's happening. So, what is one thing you want anyone listening to this, especially if they're South Asian and they're a woman, either having a rare disease or having a child with a rare disease or has a friend or is knowing or getting to know someone with a rare disease, what is one thing you would want them to know?
I think that it's important to connect with other South Asian women. That's and I think this podcast and what you're doing here, part of the innovator, in creating that space is really going to be important. I think that in the South Asian space, it's dominated by men. So and the male voices are always so strong, but we have excellent advocates in the space and researchers in the space. So it's a great way to amplify these voices. So I'm really happy that you guys are doing this. It's wonderful to showcase this, and I would say connect. Connect with us. Share as much as you can, and know that there's always a supportive community in Rare to help you move forward, and that you're not alone in this. Like that was one thing that we always think, like we're alone and we have this unique perspective that probably makes us more outliers. But now having both of you and talking about things that only probably guys could understand because you've experienced it too, it's really refreshing. So I think, key kudos to both of you for doing this.
Thank you. We're so excited to have you and your
Thank
masterclass. Like,
you.
truly, there's just so much we learned from you, and keep doing what you're doing. And we're so excited to go see X-rays. Anybody wants Nina's X-rays are on our website, Jansen's Foundation. But also just the power of taking what you have and then making it an impact, not just for the three of you in your house, but for everybody else ever to be coming after you with Jansen's, right? And so, no
Yeah.
matter where you are, no matter how small or big you are, community is, you can still find your people. It does not have to be the exact
Yeah,
same condition, the exact same um,
absolutely.
gender. You can find your people no matter where you are. And thank you,
And
Nina,
there's
for
not just one roadmap to treatments. That's very important.
100%. And
Yeah,
hopefully we'll have more master classes with you. But thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all of your wisdom.
absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you, Niveda. Lovely meeting you as well. Take
Nice to
care.
meet you too, Nina.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to South Asian Women in Rare. It means so much to us to be able to share these conversations and stories with you. If this episode resonated with you, don't forget to follow, share, and stay connected to future stories and conversations. Until next time.